Thank you, my Lord. My Lord, I will be calling the first witness, Mr. Els, to the stand to testify.
Yes.
He's in the box. Thank you.
English of Afrikaans.
Afrikaans,
Die volle naam en van asseblief.
volle naam Neville
Het u
Els.
beswaar teen die afle van die eed?
Nee,
Sweer u dat die getuienis wat u gaan nou aflê is die waarheid, die volle waarheid en niks anders die waarheid sal wees? Leg asseblief die regterhand en herhaal so help my God.
so help my God.
Thank you. Mr. Els, you may be seated.
Thank you.
Before you start, let me say this to you, Mr. Els. You've been subpoenaed to come and testify in these proceedings. As a former member of the security branch who was in contact with, or is alleged to have been in contact with Mr. Timol after his arrest. And now, we have had evidence over the past few days which raises questions about the veracity or the correctness of the statements that were made before the magistrate in 1972. So I need to point out to you that at the end of these proceedings, I'm enjoined by law to make a finding. And in the course of making that finding, if it transpires that you are implicated in the death of Mr. Timol, you might be at risk for prosecution. You understand it? I take it that your legal advisors have already informed you that. So as you testify, know that that particular outcome, if it transpires that you had a hand or you participated or you caused the death of Mr. Timol, you may be prosecuted. So I'm enjoined by the current constitution to advise you of that right that you have. Yes. Mr. Kutsia, you may proceed now.
Thank you, Lord. Lord, I will start addressing Mr. Els in Afrikaans, and I will just clear up some issues regarding the language, if you, Lordship, will allow me.
Yeah.
Meneer Els, u verkies inderdaad om u getuienis in Afrikaans af te lê, is dit korrek?
Dis korrek, eerlik.
U is wel Engels magtig en verstaan Engels?
Dis korrek, eerlik.
Sal dit u gepas indien die vraagstelling aan u in Engels plaasvind, terwyl u dan in Afrikaans antwoord?
Dit sal my pas en indien ek verduideliking lees, sal ek u nader, eerlik.
Lord, I
Yes.
will proceed. Mr. Els, you were in fact a member of the security branch police, is that correct?
That's correct.
When did you join the police force?
1952.
And when you joined the police force, did you do training?
Yes, I did.
Can you explain what your training entailed?
Initial training, the normal police training in the police college, a 6-month course.
And when you started off your career in the police, in which branch did you start off?
In the normal uniform branch of the SAP.
Did you do any specialized courses and trainings whilst you were in the police force?
Yes, in later years, a course in the identification and destruction of explosives and weapons and ammunition, as well as a course in VIP protection regarding ministers and overseas visitors to the country, and then a study in decoding of coded messages.
So, and when did you join the security branch of the police service?
It could be approximately 1966. 1967.
And when did you leave the force, the South African Police Force?
I think it was in 1979.
And thereafter you were a member of civic life. You were not back at any stage into the police force.
No,
So what is your age currently?
82 years.
Mr. Els, in the security branch of the police force, what was your specific posting there?
Do you mean the work as
Yes,
such?
what were you doing? What was your
The main
tasks?
The main task would have been the identification and destruction of explosives, ammunition, and VIP protection duties, which took me away from the office for periods, maybe a week, maybe two at a time.
And by the time that you left the police force, what was your rank?
I left the police as a captain. I resigned.
In 1971, what was your rank in
A
1971?
warrant officer.
So you made a statement to the police in 1971 in relation to your involvement with Mr. Ahmed Timol. Are you aware of that? Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
Now, in terms of this statement, on the 23rd of October 1971, Mr. Timol was arrested. Can you inform the court what was your involvement with Mr. Timol?
On that particular day, it was to identify documents that were in the vehicle, which I identified as documents similar to documents that were distributed by means of a small explosive device, and thereby scattering the documents to eventually be blown around.
How did it come about that you became involved in this matter?
I was the security police official on duty that particular evening or day, and on certain matters we were called out to either assist or to identify objects.
And can you remember where did you find Mr. Timol and the documents?
If I have to recall, according to my statement, it was at the Newlands police station.
Can you describe to the court what did you find when you arrived there at the Newlands police station?
I cannot in detail, but I will say that there was a vehicle which was shown to me by the, I take it, arresting officers, and in the vehicle there was a container, a box with these pamphlets. The nature of the pamphlets at this stage I cannot relate to. I haven't seen it again, so I can't say at this stage exactly what the pamphlets look like.
And on identifying the documents, what did you do?
I informed a senior officer of the security branch who was involved in investigations, informed him of what was found, and from that stage he took over as far as the investigation is.
Can you recall who this officer was that you contacted?
If it's in my statement, I will say a officer with the surname of Dirker, is it? I'm not sure. I think his rank was a major or captain.
Yes, I can confirm, but it's not necessary to show him that it is Dirker. His memory serves him right. So after Captain Dirker at that stage arrived at Newlands Police Station, what was your further involvement with regard to Mr. Timol?
No further involvement.
Did you see Mr. Timol at the time when you were called to identify the contents of that box that you find? Was Mr. Timol near you?
He must have been there, yes, my lord.
You cannot recall.
No, I can't.
And was there some other person other than Mr. Timol who was not a police officer when you inspected it? Was such person present?
There were two, if I have to, Mr. Essop and Mr. Timol. But if I saw them at that stage, I cannot recall. I cannot remember that. But they would have been there, and uniform branch officers of the police.
Proceed.
So as a general rule of your tasking at the security branch, were you involved in arrested persons after their arrest?
No, no. I may have been involved when explosives or devices or code messages were found. I would have then been involved in just a observer, but not anything else.
Did you yourself do any interrogation?
I can't recall, no. Can't remember.
Well, it's not only in terms of interrogation of Mr. Timol. Did you ever participate in the interrogation of any other detainee?
Not in this particular case, my lord, or in general?
In general.
I would have, yes.
Mr. Els, it is common cause that Mr. Timol died he died on the 27th of October 1971. Are you aware of that? Were you at that stage aware of that?
Yes. Of the specific date? No. It was common knowledge, but I did not go further into the matter.
I've got no further questions.
Yes. Where were you stationed at that time?
The John Vorster Square, the police officers in Johannesburg.
Now, we have evidence which states that, and this comes from a former member of the security police, that there was a general practice of calling in members of the security police busy in other sections to come and assist with interrogation just to keep a detainee from taking any slip throughout. Did you participate in such interrogation activities?
Not that I can recall, my lord. What I would say that during interrogations, or if interrogations took place, it would have been to obtain the information as soon as possible.
Yes.
if needed.
Dr. Pretorius?
Thank you, my lord. Yes. You say the policy was to obtain the information as soon as possible. Is it correct?
That's correct.
So working through the night would be no problem. If you have to work through the night, you will work through the night.
Yes.
Did you have offices at John Vorster Square?
I had an office, yes.
Which floor?
If I must recall, I would say on the 9th floor, near the entrance to the building, to the lift.
I would have thought you were clear on that. Did you have an office on the 9th floor?
Yes, but the exact office I cannot, how far down the passage that I cannot remember.
You knew the policeman that gave evidence last week, Paul Erasmus. He worked under you, not so.
I know the name, Erasmus, yes.
Before I'm asking you about teams that worked together when a big fish was caught at that stage, you know the term strategic communication, STRACOM.
Repeat the Afrikaans.
STRACOM, strategische communicatie, Afrikaans, strategische communicatie, STRACOM, you know that.
Yes, I would say I did.
I want to get back to the first team. At that stage, more or less 22 people were arrested in this swoop. It was a big operation, not so.
It would have been, yes.
You say it would have been. Wouldn't you have been roped in to come and help with this 22 people that had to be interrogated?
I must say that I cannot recall that even.
Let's see if we can jog your memory. Professor Knight sitting in this court, and he was interrogated on the Saturday evening. His hands got paralyzed because the helicopter method was used for his torture. And there was a psychotherapist that assisted in this specific instance, Ayekun, because his one hand was totally paralyzed and he had to get treatment for that hand for a long time. And there was allegations of torture. And you made a statement in that specific allegation that you were involved in the interrogation of Professor Knight on that Saturday evening, from Saturday evening 9 o'clock till the next morning. Is it possible?
I personally, at this stage, cannot recall it.
But is it possible? The question was
That I was involved.
yes, and that you did an affidavit in this allegation is about torture, that you were involved in the questioning of Professor Knight.
I may have asked him a question if I was involved. If it's in my statement, yes.
I want to understand how it would have worked. If 22 people got arrested, I presume a roster would have to be drawn up to do the questioning, because your evidence was you want that information as soon as possible, not so?
In any case, I think.
But especially in a big case
That
like
would
this,
have been one.
and what would happen to the detainees? Would they be held in the offices?
During interrogation,
Yes.
they would have been held wherever they were interrogated, yes.
And they would also sleep there in certain instances.
That I cannot recall, I cannot answer that.
Now, let's just test this. At that stage, this was a big scoop. A main unit of the communists, the leader of this main unit got arrested, not so?
wouldn't, I can't say he's the main unit or the main member of the,
Okay, let's say an important member of a communist cell got arrested, not so.
a person was arrested at that stage. I cannot say if he was important or if he was a key member. He was arrested, and that's what I can say.
Okay, and 21 other people also got arrested.
If the number is correct, yes.
And the information needed to be obtained as soon as possible from these people.
Yes.
Which people would have been involved in the interrogation of these people?
I would say people involved in that particular case and investigators doing interrogation.
22 people that were arrested, some of them must have been on the 9th floor at John Vorster Square.
I cannot recall that. I cannot confirm that.
Did you see any of the detainees?
I would have, yes.
And let me test your approach here. You would have seen with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the TRC, that a number of policemen applied for amnesty regarding torture.
Yes.
Mr. Paul Erasmus gave evidence in this court that it was common practice that people were sometimes assaulted.
If he was aware of it and it happened in his presence, it could be.
But you were never aware of it and you don't know nothing about it.
I am definite on that point that I would not have assaulted or otherwise tortured a detainee.
Yes, that's not what I'm asking whether you would do it. I'm asking whether you were aware of it.
It was in media, in press, it was knowledge available.
But from walking on the 9th floor, possibly doing a visit to the 10th floor, you've never observed anything of the sort.
In the period that I did walk in the building and where interrogation was taking place, I cannot recall seeing it or knowing about it, although it was common knowledge.
That's an interesting answer. If you say it was common knowledge that it happened,
You mentioned that it was common knowledge. Yes, it's in the press, you hear it daily.
after seeing the pamphlets at Newlands Police Station and seeing Mr. Ahmed Timol and Dr. Esop there, did you see them again?
I would have seen them at some stage, yes.
Where and when and in what situation?
It would have been at John Vorster Square, either wherever I was and they were there at the same time, yes.
Can you describe in which situation you did see them again? Was it on the 10th floor?
I cannot describe it in detail, my lord.
What is of interest to me, your field of expertise were explosives.
Yes, that's correct.
This also related to bucket bombs.
That's correct.
Bucket bombs is not necessarily meant to kill people, but to distribute pamphlets, not so.
That's correct.
And this exactly related to this case,
Yes.
and also coded messages.
I cannot recall coded messages being involved in this case. I cannot.
You were not involved in that.
No.
But as to the bucket bomb, you would have been involved. You were the explosive
If
expert.
explosives were found, yes.
You said explosives were found.
No, if they were found, I would have been involved.
The allegation was that Ahmed Timol distributed communist pamphlets. Were you at any stage involved in investigating that or looking at previous pamphlets and bucket bombs?
No, but that the methods used to distribute it was, one of the methods would have been by bucket bomb with a light explosive.
Now, after looking at the pamphlets in the Anglia, the yellow Anglia, where you looked at it and handing it over to the senior officer, were you at all involved in this 22 people and the interrogation?
I cannot recall that.
Is it
that I was
possible that
involved.
you were involved?
I beg your-
Is it possible that you would have
It's
been
possible, but I cannot at this stage say, yes, I was involved in the investigation.
on the day Mr. Timol died? Can you remember whether you were at John Vorster Square?
Cannot.
Okay, you said you knew what is Stratcom. Can you explain in layman's terms to us what is Stratcom?
I wouldn't be able to explain in layman's terms, but
My lord, there's a file in regard to this specific witness that I didn't have sight of. Can I ask for a short adjournment that I can just see if I can't get this file, if there's necessary questions in regard to that? I haven't had that file yet. Can I ask for a short adjournment that I can just have a look at this file?
How long? How long?
10 minutes, my lord.
Yes. It's 10:42. We'll come back at 11.
As the court pleases. Thank you, my lord.
We adjourn.
Anton, you must listen.
There you go. Anton, can you hear me now? Okay, I just wanted to know, the judge, was he a bit off mic or was he fine? Okay, cool.
I'm indebted to the court, my lord. I did not receive the file as yet, but I think I can finish this witness. Mr. Joel Radicus is more important than Mr. Ahmed Timol, so there's just one or two questions that I need. Mr. Elsa, you gave evidence that you received training, the normal, usually police training. I want to know from you, were first aid part of that usual training, the normal police training at the police college?
Yes, it was.
And then you gave evidence that you left the police, I think, in 1971.
No,
When did you...
would say around about 1979, my lord.
1970. Why did you leave the police?
I would say personal reasons.
I just want to flush out a little bit more of your career. You were involved in the conflict in Zimbabwe and Rhodesia?
Border duties, yes, my
Border
lord.
duties.
That's correct, my lord.
And then you did VIP protection.
That's correct, my lord.
That was for the Prime Minister, for the President, Minister Piet Koornhof.
Yes, my lord.
You were also involved in a high treason trial in Pietermaritzburg.
That's correct, my lord.
Can you just flush that out a little bit? Can you give us more detail, please?
In that particular case, I was involved in the protection of witnesses in the state's case and the taking of statements of state witnesses that testified in the case.
Which case was this specific?
That's the high treason trial in Pietermaritzburg. I'm not sure of the date.
You say it was common knowledge about torture in the security police. What forms of torture were you aware of?
What would have been in media reports?
Let's say sleep deprivation?
I wouldn't call that torture.
Not torture.
I wouldn't call that torture.
And mock executions?
Mock
Executions. Or hanging people over stairs. Were you aware of that?
No.
Of what type of torture were you aware of?
I was only aware of torture as revealed in the press, in the media. What was mentioned then was what I would say, that's what I've heard, that's what I've read. I wasn't aware of it taking place in my presence, in my company.
Did you know a person by the name Gert van Tonder? That he worked at John Vorster Square?
The name rings a bell. I cannot say, well, I would have known him if it's a member of the branch.
You received some medals and commendations. Can you just elaborate on that?
It would have been the normal police service medal for X amount of service years. The Southern Cross medal for border duties, and a bar on the medal, which would have been an extra medal also for border duty activities.
My lord, that concludes my questioning. Thank you. My junior, just one more question with the leave of the court. Mr. Elsa, I just want to know, was anybody else, except for the security guards, allowed on the 9th and the 10th floor?
The public?
Yes. Public or anybody else from State departments, etc. Was anybody else allowed on the 9th and 10th floor?
If they had a reason to be there, yes.
Also the public?
The public would have been allowed, I suppose, with police escort, my lord.
So there would be control of the people that come to the 9th and 10th
Yes.
floor. Thank you, my lord.
Mr. Els, you say that you were aware of the torture and assaults from the media, reports in the media. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I said, my lord.
And as members of the security branch, was there an occasion where, with your colleagues, you discussed these allegations that were in the media about the torture and assaults? Did you discuss this?
It was spoken amongst members as a conversation, yes, my lord.
And what was the mood of the conversation? What was it about?
It would have been casual, not serious.
And are you aware of any members in the security branch who were ever charged with assault?
I believe there were. Personally, I never saw them. I never spoke to them directly.
Do you know the person by the name of Colonel Grayling?
Colonel Grayling was the commanding officer in a period that I was at John Vorster Square.
In fact, according to the evidence and the statements here, Colonel Grayling was in charge of all the members of the security branch who were interrogating Mr. Timol. Would you agree with that?
As the commanding officer, I
Yes.
take it that would have been his responsibility.
Yes. And Colonel Grayling was also a respondent in a case that was brought by Mr. Salim Esop's father, seeking his release. Do you know about that case?
No, I don't, my lord.
Let me tell you about it because it's important. When Mr. Salim Esop was admitted at the hospital in a coma, the father approached High Court. At that time, it was called the Transvaal Provincial Division of the Supreme Court, that is this division. And he sought an interdict to stop the assault on Salim Esop. Now, Colonel Grayling was cited as a second respondent in that case. And the two judges who heard that application rejected his version that there were no assaults on Mr. Esop. The two judges rejected that. And they held that he was less than honest to the court in his affidavit when he said that there were no assaults on Mr. Esop. Now, Mr. Esop, Salim Esop, is the person who was arrested with Mr. Timol. Now, the court in the end found that in fact he was assaulted, Mr. Salim Esop. And they granted the interdict. Now, with that background, and I've noticed that Colonel Grayling was not one of the witnesses during the inquest in 1972, because that judgment came in February and the inquest started in April. So when the inquest started, two judges of this court had already found that Colonel Grayling was lying, was not telling the truth about the assaults. Now, with that background, I want you to say now whether you still assert that you heard about the assaults from the media and nowhere else and you never saw them. Do you still stand by that?
I personally was not present when a accused was. If he was assaulted, I wasn't present during assaults on detainees. On the particular case where Colonel Grayling was the commanding officer, I knew him as a person. I was not involved otherwise with the investigation of the particular case.
Mr. Vani, we are approaching the tea break hour. Would you like to start at 11:30?
As a court case.
Yes, I see it's now 11. If you start at 11:30, because I think it will be some time with this witness.
Yes, Lord.
Yeah, okay, then we'll start at 11:30.
As the court case.
Yes, we'll adjourn until 11:30.
As the break gets
Mr. Van?
Lord, before we commence, we'd like to hand up some exhibits. And perhaps I can ask the clerk to come get them so I can take you through, because there are 4 exhibits. And this has to go to him. My Lord, the first document is merely an updated exhibit list. So with your leave, the first exhibit we would like to hand up is a document that we have compiled ourselves. It is a schedule of interrogators who interviewed or questioned Mr. K. Nike. And that information, as appears from the face of that document, was taken from Mr. Nike's Department of Justice file, and that's at Exhibit G3.
Is C13 or
It's
G3?
It's C12, my lord.
Which one are we talking about? Because what I have here is C13 and C14 and C12. Oh yes,
It's an A3 sheet, my lord.
You say what is it about?
That is a schedule of interrogators who questioned or interviewed Mr. K. Nike during his period of detention at John Vorster Square.
Okay.
Then the next exhibit is Dr. Nike's testimony before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and that is marked C13.
Yes.
And the third document is a table compiled by my legal team. It's titled Torture Alleged at John Vorster Square. And the date, my lord, should be between the 23rd of October and the 27th of October 1971. I'm advised that actually it says the 21st of October, but in fact it should read the 23rd of October. And then finally, my lord, in case we need it, we've provided the court and our colleagues with a calendar for 1971, and we've marked that Exhibit L.
Do all counsel have copies of these documents? Do you have them?
Thank you.
And Dr. Pretorius, you have them?
We've got copies there.
Yes.
And my lord, the witness, to the extent he needs, has also been supplied with copies. And I should say we've also supplied the witness with Dr. Nike's affidavit. That's at page 105 of Volume C, as well as Mr. Nike's Department of Justice file, and that's at G3. Lord, with your leave, I'll commence with my
Yes.
cross-examination. Mr. Els, before I commence with my cross-examination, I just want to point out to you that this proceeding is not a criminal trial. It's about truth-seeking. I'm not here to try and trick you, and we're not here to sit in judgment of you. All the legal representatives here and all the witnesses who have appeared before this court are involved in a process to help His Lordship reach the truth, and also to help the family of Mr. Timol to reach closure, as well as to help our country to reach closure on this matter. And if you're tired or need a break, then simply ask the court, and the court will consider your request. Mr. Els, you have advised us when you joined the police and when you joined the security branch, which you say was in 1966 or 67. Can I ask you, when did you start work at John Vorster Square in Johannesburg?
When the new offices were opened, we were at a building with the name The Greys down in the centre of Johannesburg before.
So you in fact started the very day that the building opened for operations?
I would say so, yes.
Mr. Els, who asked you to go to Newlands Police Station on the evening of 23rd October 1971?
It would have been a call from the uniformed police at Newlands Police Station, my lord.
And just to clarify, were you the after-hours duty officer for the security branch that evening?
Would have been, my lord.
And so what would your hours have been for that particular night?
I would say right through the night.
So when would you have started work?
In the morning of that particular day, on a continuous basis.
I see. So if you're the duty officer, then you have to stay on all through the night?
You're on call, virtually, yes.
On call. And what time would you knock off in the morning?
No, I can't recall.
You can't recall?
No.
But would you say it was when the sun was up, when it was daytime?
No, I just can't remember.
You can't recall. Okay. And why were you asked to come over and actually inspect these particular documents?
I suppose it's the fact that certain literature was found in the car, and I was to look at that.
I see. And did you have perhaps some previous experience with subversive
literature,
leaflets, communist
pamphlets?
propaganda?
Yes, I've seen some before, but I cannot recall the detail of those.
But you would say that you had some experience in recognizing
Yes.
that those kinds of documents. You've testified in your evidence in chief that after you called Captain Durker in and he had arrived, you left Newlands and that you played no further role in this matter.
As far as I can remember, my lord, yes, I played no further role.
I put it to you that given the magnitude of the events of that evening, wouldn't it have been eminently possible that you would have been further involved, perhaps in interrogating individuals, even if it wasn't Mr. Timol, perhaps arresting others, or maybe even examining these documents further?
I was not involved in the arresting of anybody after that. I may have looked at the documents in question, but other detail I simply cannot remember, my lord.
Mr. Els, where was Captain Durker's office situated at John Vorster Square?
I cannot remember that. It would have been on one of the two floors mentioned, 9th or the 10th.
9th floor, the 10th. Was it perhaps close to where your office was situated, near the lifts?
I cannot recall.
Okay. But you have indicated where your office was located. You said it was on the 9th floor, not so far from
Not far from the entrance.
From the entrance and the lifts. And should this court conduct a further inspection at John Vorster Square, you would be able to point out your...
More or less, yes. If it's the same.
Yes. Well, obviously, I can tell you that in terms of the structure of the building, that hasn't changed in any substantial way. Mr. Els, according to the statement of Captain Durker, and my lord, for the record, that statement can be found in volume B at Exhibit NN, at pages 98 to 99. So according to Captain Durker's statement, he was the investigating officer looking into the distribution of 3 documents, and he names them in Kululeko Freedom Number 1. The title of the second one is the ANC says no to Foster Anna's gang, and the third document is Sons and Daughters of Africa. Now, there is evidence before this court, and we'll need more evidence, is that these South African Communist Party and ANC leaflets were part of a hugely successful distribution campaign carried out in 1970 and 71. And you in fact, have mentioned that part of the manner of distribution was to use these bucket bombs,
Yes.
these small explosive devices. We'll also hear from a witness to testify later this week that the government was under enormous pressure to apprehend those behind this leaflet campaign. Were you aware of any strategy put in place by the security branch to address this illegal distribution of leaflets, this campaign run by the SACP and the ANC?
It may have been that we were informed by the commanding officer to be on the lookout for such distributions or methods of distribution, my lord.
And prior to the arrest of Mr. Timol and Mr. Essop, were you aware of any arrests that had been made in connection with this leaflet campaign?
I cannot recall, no.
Can you recall whether at the time this national leaflet campaign, which happened across the country in cities such as Cape Town, Johannesburg, Durban and Port Elizabeth, can you recall whether this was quite a big embarrassment to the government?
I would say it would have been.
So Captain Durker, being the investigating officer into this leaflet campaign, do you recall whether he was very pleased, very happy to have caught Mr. Timol and Mr. Esop, given the contents of the documents that were seized?
I cannot say if he was or not, no, my lord.
Did Captain Durker hold the view that that the security branch, in arresting Mr. Timol, had caught the mastermind, or perhaps one of the key role players in this campaign?
That I cannot say, my lord.
Did you have occasion to talk to Captain Durker following your return to John Vorster Square, or any time thereafter, in connection with this incident?
I may have been speaking to him on certain aspects, but I cannot recall any detail if it was.
Did the security branch consider the arrest of Mr. Ahmed Timol? Did they regard Mr. Timol to be an important figure, or as we sometimes say, a big fish?
At what stage? Immediately?
Well, once the documents had been inspected and they realized who they had in their hands.
I cannot say they would have regarded him as a big fish, no. As a suspect, yes, but I cannot think that he would have been termed a big fish.
Right. Well, indeed, there is evidence put forward in the first inquest that he was seen as a big fish or an important figure. For example, Lieutenant Colonel van Wyk. Before I put to you what he said, do you recall that Lieutenant Colonel van Wyk?
Only the name rings a bell. I cannot visualize him at this stage, my lord.
Well, in Lieutenant Colonel van Wyk's statement before the first inquest, and my lord, that's also Volume B, Exhibit F, pages 8 to 11, paragraph 7. He says in his statement before the first inquest that because Mr. Timol was in direct contact with the SACP Central Committee, and he was in control of the main unit in South Africa, the main SACP unit, that he was of onskatbare waarde to the security branch. Onskatbare waarde. I would interpret that as an inestimable value.
Yes.
And Colonel van Wyk then goes on to say that because of the value of this particular detainee, it was immediately decided not to hold him in the cells because communists had previously escaped from the cells and also had been able to communicate with people on the outside. So given his importance and given these dangers, it was decided to place him under guard, not in the cells, but in the offices of the security branch of John Vorster Square. Mr. Els, would that mean that Mr. Timol would have been under guard round the clock by trained and able-bodied policemen?
If that is what the colonel mentioned, I suppose it would have been.
But what was the practice at that time for detainees who were held not in the cells but in the offices? Were they under 24/7, round the clock?
Oh, they would have been, because they they would not have been left alone, no.
Yes. And even when interrogation stopped, would they be guarded by trained and able-bodied policemen, perhaps from the protection unit?
I wouldn't say the protection unit, but members of the security branch that were on duty would have guarded them in the absence of the interrogator.
And these would have been trained policemen and physically able-bodied?
Trained, They would have been policemen, yes.
And yet, at the time when Timol allegedly committed suicide, the police version says that he was left entirely alone with a pay clerk.
With a?
With a pay clerk, an administrative clerk who pays police members.
I cannot confirm that.
But are you surprised to hear that he was left alone with
To
a
me,
pay clerk?
it doesn't sound right, my lord.
It doesn't sound right.
No.
And furthermore, Mr. Timol's detention order says that he should have been detained at the cells of John Vorster Square. So presumably when he was not being interrogated, the detention order, which governed his detention, said that he must be held in the cells.
That could be, my lord.
And would you agree with me that, given the evidence of the police, that in fact he was, even when he was not being interrogated, he was not held at the cells, but in the offices, that conduct was plainly unlawful?
I'm not aware of that, so I cannot comment on that, my lord.
Well, let me rephrase this. If the detention order says, hold this man in the police cells at John Vorster Square, one can understand that from time to time the detainee would be taken for questioning in an office. But when the questioning is complete and the interrogators then leave the office,
he would be taken back.
One would expect the detainee to be taken back.
I think so, yes, my lord.
Now, in the case of Mr. Timol, and indeed in the case of other detainees from whom we've heard, detained at John Vorster Square at that time, some of them were never taken back to their cells, and in fact they were held in the offices and even slept in the offices. So I'm putting it to you that where there is a detention order that says detain somebody in the police cells, and in fact post-interrogation or between interrogations they are kept at the offices on the 9th or the 10th floor, that is unlawful conduct because it violates the detention order.
It must be as you explained, my lord.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Ells, you've said that, you've testified in your evidence in chief that you did not see Mr. Timol at any time. You're quite certain of that?
I cannot recall seeing him, no.
Did you see any other detainees between the 22nd and the 27th of October 1971 in John Vorster Square?
Detainees relating to this inquest?
Yes, related to this inquest, security detainees.
I cannot recall, no, my lord.
Well, although we will get to it, and you have said so in response to questions from Mr. Pretorius that you did question Mr. K. Nike, who was a detainee at John Vorster Square at that time.
I may have been involved in sitting in during questioning, if it's on record, yes, but the detail regarding that I cannot remember.
All right, we'll return to Mr. Nike's case shortly. Did you see any other detainee between the 22nd and the 27th of October 1971, either in an office or perhaps in the corridors, perhaps being taken to the bathroom, or perhaps being moved from one office to another, any detainee who appeared to be distressed or injured in any way?
No, I cannot recall that, my lord.
When you happen to be in the corridors of the 9th floor and the 10th floor, did you ever see detainees being moved between officers? And this is not necessarily over those particular days.
I may not have even been in the building because I was away for periods of months. I cannot recall. I'm
Yes.
sorry.
Okay. Have you ever seen a detainee being escorted in the corridors of John Vorster Square?
I would have seen them, yes. Walking, maybe passing in the corridor, I could have, yes.
Yes. And in any one of those occasions, did you ever see a detainee with a hood or his with a mask over his face, in other words, to obscure his vision?
That I cannot recall, my lord.
And just for the record, and this question relates to at any time that you worked at John Vorster Square for the security branch, did you ever see a detainee who appeared to be injured or in some form of distress?
Personally, no.
Mr. Els, did you know or did you come across the following two security branch officers, Captain Johannes Hendrik Gloy and Captain Johannes Zachariah van Niekerk?
The first name you mentioned, Gloy, correct?
Yes, Gloy, G-L-O-Y.
I think he was a colonel at some stage whilst I was a officer at John Vorster Square. But as a officer of rank, that's the way I would have remembered him, that's all.
And Captain van Niekerk?
Yes, I remember a Captain van Niekerk.
We're going to return to them shortly. Of course, in terms of the evidence, these two were involved in the interrogation of Mr. Timol. Actually, while we're here, just on Captain Gloy, we've inspected his personal file, and interestingly enough, his leave record says that he was on leave at this time. So is it possible that because of the importance of the Timol case and the influx of detainees, as you heard from Mr. Pretorius, as many as 22 were rounded up, do you think it's possible that Captain Gloy was called in, even though he was on leave, to come in and help out?
It's possible, my lord.
And did that sort of thing happen, where members were on leave, but if there was a real need, they'd be called in from their leave to assist?
I cannot confirm it, but it is possible, my lord.
Now, Captains Gloy and van Niekerk were not in fact based at John Vorster Square in Pretoria. They were based
In Johannesburg.
in Pretoria.
The
According to
Captain
the
van Niekerk that I know and remember or visualize, he was definitely stationed at John Vorster Square.
All right. Well, it may be that you're thinking of another Captain
Yes.
van Niekerk. We will try to establish what rank van Niekerk eventually ended up. I think it was quite a high rank. We'll come back to you on that. You can accept for the moment, because it's reflected in their statements that they were based in Pretoria and were called in to Johannesburg to assist at John Vorster Square. given that they didn't have offices, their offices were in Pretoria, so they didn't have offices at John Vorster Square. Do you know what offices they may have been allocated to work in?
I cannot recall it, no, my lord.
Well, let me ask you this. Typically, in those days, when out-of-town officers had to come in to assist with interrogations, would they be allocated a certain set of officers that perhaps were like general or communal officers, not specifically occupied by anybody?
I cannot, I really cannot answer that, my lord.
The officers on the 10th floor, and here I'm thinking of officers such as rooms 1026, 1027, and the 1028. So those officers on the 10th floor, and we know from the evidence that at least for part of the time, Mr. Timol was being interrogated in room 1026. Were those officers occupied on a full-time basis, or were they just used as and when the need arose?
I would think that they were occupied by officers on a full-time basis.
So those officers would simply vacate in order to allow, say, Captain Gloyd and Captain Van Niekerk to interrogate Timol?
Unless the officer whose office it was also involved in the investigation and interrogation.
Yes, indeed. Now, Mr. Els, you made a statement in the original inquest. Can I ask you, do you broadly align yourself with the general version of the police in the first inquest? And perhaps at its most simple level, that version is as follows. There was no abuse or mistreatment of Mr. Timol. And secondly, Mr. Timol committed suicide by exiting the window of room 1026.
Personally, I cannot answer that. I would not say either way. I cannot answer that, my lord.
Well, at the time of the inquest, presumably you knew of the inquest. You had made a statement to the inquest, and you presumably at least followed what was happening in those proceedings, and also did you hear of the outcome of the inquest, the finding of the magistrate?
No, that I did not concentrate on.
So you did not hear that the magistrate accepted the police version that Mr. Timol was not mistreated and that he had committed suicide?
I cannot confirm that. No, I definitely can't.
And as we sit here today, looking back, would you align yourself with that police version? In other words, with the finding of the first inquest magistrate?
That he was?
That he wasn't mistreated by the police?
I cannot say because I wasn't aware of the inquest. I wasn't present when the alleged suicide happened. I wasn't there, definitely not.
Okay, let's... I want to turn to the question of torture that has been alleged to have taken place at John Vorster Square. Mr. Els, we've heard the evidence of 3 detainees who were detained either at the same time as Mr. Timol or their detention period overlapped with that of Mr. Timol. And that is Mr. Salim Esop, Mr. Kay Naik, and Ms. Dilsha Chetam. What I want to do is summarize the allegations of torture that they have made to this court. And then I want to ask you certain questions arising out of the allegations of torture that they have made. And I want to put to you types of torture that appears in their statements, as well as their oral testimony. And the types of torture include the following. Let's begin with punching, kicking, and slapping. In your experience, have you heard of security branch officers being involved in such types of assault, let's call it, against detainees?
I've heard of it, yes.
And where have you heard of such incidents?
In general, my lord, I cannot recall a specific detailed report, but in general.
You've testified that you yourself was never involved in
I
any
would
form
not
of
have
abuse.
involved myself with an assault, no.
Were you ever aware of anybody making a complaint against the security branch for being punched, kicked, or slapped?
Yes, I have heard of that.
But I assume only in general.
In general, yes, my lord.
And have you heard or aware of any complaints relating to the following practice? The standing on detainees' toes, pressing or stamping?
No, my lord.
You haven't heard of that? The dragging of a detainee by the hair or pulling the hair?
No, my lord.
The making of threats of torture or more torture and possibly even death against a detainee?
Not in my presence, my lord.
Not in your presence, but have you heard complaints of such threats?
I've heard of it, but I cannot recall detail in regard to that.
The placing of a Hessian or a plastic bag over the head of a detainee?
No, I cannot recall that.
What about electrocution or electric shock treatment?
That, as I've explained, has been in the media quite often. But
Are you aware of any security branch officer who has been involved in applying electric shocks to a detainee?
no, I'm not aware of it.
The practice of meal kicks. Do you know what meal kicks are?
If you're referring to a wrestling maneuver, I'm aware of a mule kick, yes.
And what is that maneuver?
Well, if it's what's called a mule kick in wrestling, the person would be standing and the other person would be at a horizontal position with his feet, kicking, striking the opponent. That I would term a mule kick.
Kicking, striking the body generally, or the upper legs?
Any part of the body.
Right. Well, the specific allegations is that there was continual mule kicking, which was kicking, presumably with booted feet, on the thighs or upper legs.
I cannot recall that. I cannot confirm that either, my lord.
And I think you, in your evidence in response to questions from Mr. Pretorius, you say you've never heard of anybody being dangled over the stairwell at John Vorster Square with the ankles.
Over the stairwell?
Yes.
That I cannot recall at all, my lord.
And while we're on that topic, have you ever heard an allegation or a complaint in respect of somebody being held outside the window by the ankles?
That I've heard of, I think recently on TV it was mentioned.
Yes,
very recently.
I'm talking about during your period as a security branch officer.
No, during that period, no.
Prior to Mr. Timol falling to his death, have you ever heard of anybody else falling to their deaths from a police building?
At the Grays building, yes, there was an incident. Who the person was, I cannot remember the name, but that I recall, my lord, did happen. There was a person that jumped out of a window at the Grays.
So, as far as you can recall, that person jumped out as in committing suicide?
Yes, my lord.
Have you ever heard of a detainee under interrogation, falling unconscious?
No, my lord, I cannot recall that it was mentioned to me or that I saw an incident as described.
So you've never seen a detainee who perhaps is unconscious?
No, I haven't, my lord.
And have you ever seen a detainee perhaps in a distressed or injured position trying to be revived by a doctor or medical personnel?
Could you repeat the question?
In your time as a security branch officer, did you have occasion to see a detainee who perhaps was in a disabled state being attended to by a doctor?
No, I didn't see it, but I think it was general practice that detainees were visited and seen to by doctors and a magistrate at certain intervals. But
and on the 9th or 10th floors, at any time while you were a security branch officer and present, did you ever see a detainee receiving medical attention?
No, I did not, my lord.
The practice of urinating on a detainee?
Definitely not, my lord.
And let's just talk for a moment about sleep deprivation. You've already testified to this court that you didn't regard this as torture.
No, I don't.
And can you explain why you don't regard it as a form of torture?
In my personal opinion, I would feel that you want evidence, you want an explanation of a certain fact, and by interrogating the person, you would continue until you have the answer, my lord.
And you would continue for as long as it takes?
Well, I suppose you do reach a stage where you stop. If you are of the opinion that you cannot obtain the answer, I would personally immediately stop.
But what if you have the opinion that you can obtain an answer? Would you keep going?
I would continue until such time that I'm sure I can or cannot obtain an answer.
There is evidence, Mr. Els, before this court of detainees being kept awake sometimes for as long as 4 days or 5 days. So in your view, that would be acceptable treatment?
No, I would say the interrogation on my side would have been until I am satisfied that the person can give me an answer or has reached a stage or proves that no answer is available, my lord. I would have stopped that. 4 or 5 days, no, I would not have seen to that.
But it in fact happened, and presumably because the interrogators in question thought that continuing for that long period, they might just somehow extract an answer.
They may have been. I'm not aware of that, in their opinion.
And is the reason for keeping somebody awake for at times days, what is the reasoning behind it? Is it because there's the hope that the detainee becomes disorientated, perhaps becomes distressed? Disillusioned.
No, that could happen, I suppose, but in my personal opinion, the evidence given then would be of no value. I would not have accepted it. I mean, the making of a statement or giving a fact, my lord, in a person that is not answering in a lucid manner, no, I think that would not have been of any value.
Mr. Els, I want to put it to you that torture is in fact a well-recognized form of torture under interrogation, and that we will be submitting to this court that the sleep deprivation that the detainees sustained at the time, sometimes up to several days, constitutes a severe form of torture.
I cannot comment on that, my lord. My opinion is that I would have interrogated a person to within reason, whereby if the answers are given, are followed, and proven what I wanted to know, yes, I would have stopped. But for 4 or 5 days, I suppose at that length of time, it can be torture. It can be extreme.
And can I ask you, well, thank you for that admission, Mr. Els. Can I ask you, in your own interrogations, what's the longest you have kept a detainee awake without sleep?
No, I cannot recall a period. I would say maximum of 8 hours.
But was it not true, Mr. Els, that in that period, and we're going to return to this, there was a roster system of interrogation, and when one set of interrogators left, another would arrive, so not giving the opportunity for a detainee to rest, even if one session had lasted 8 hours?
I cannot recall a roster system. I cannot visualize who would have taken over and continued and returned and continued again. That I cannot confirm.
We will return to that, and we'll try to help refresh your memory. But let's continue with some of the alleged practices in John Vorster Square at the time. It was alleged that detainees were made to stand on one leg with hands raised high. Did you ever hear of that?
No, my lord.
And on that theme, to do a half squat with hands raised high.
I personally didn't do that or requested that. No, it wasn't done in my presence.
But did you ever hear of it being done, even if you were not present?
No, not in detail, my lord.
Not in detail?
Not in detail.
So you heard of it in what?
In the broader
in
sense,
terms?
yes, but not in detail, and I personally cannot recall.
And you heard that from your colleagues?
It would have been discussed, yes.
And how would it have been discussed?
person to person, if a person doing the interrogation did that.
And would you discuss it informally, perhaps socially, or as part of a formal meeting?
I wouldn't say socially, definitely not. It may have been discussed between two officers.
Would it have been discussed as a tactic to use during interrogation?
That I cannot say, my lord.
What about sitting on an imaginary chair? So sitting, but there's no chair, but you still have to pretend that you're sitting on a chair.
I've heard of that, yes, but I haven't seen it.
And you heard of it, and as you've just testified, because it was spoken about.
It was mentioned, yes.
Between colleagues at the office.
Yes.
Can you remember the names, perhaps, of those officers?
I cannot remember the names, my lord.
Why do you think that this particular practice would be raised in conversation at the office?
I cannot recall why it would be. It may have, it could have been a discussion, that's all.
Yes, a discussion, but to what end?
In general, I cannot say why it was discussed, or it would have been a general conversation. That is what I would visualize.
Okay, the next alleged torture, standing on a sheet of A4 paper for extended periods of time.
I'm not aware of that at all, my lord.
Depriving a detainee of food and water for extended periods.
Of that I'm not aware of, my lord.
The next one, Mr. Else, is not allowing a detainee to go to the restroom and relieve himself or herself. In other words, forcing them to urinate while fully clothed in the presence of police officers.
It hasn't happened in my presence, and I'm not aware of any officer in whose presence it could have happened. I'm not aware of it.
And you've never heard of it, never been
No,
discussed?
that I have not heard, my lord.
Have you ever heard of detainees being given drugs?
No,
somehow
no.
applied drugs?
No, definitely not.
The use of solitary confinement, do you regard that as a form of torture?
I cannot answer that, my lord. I cannot answer that.
Okay, so for the moment I'm not asking you whether you heard of that practice. I'm just asking whether, in your view, your opinion, solitary confinement is a form of torture or not.
I cannot confirm that it's a form of torture. Solitary confinement, no, I cannot see that as a form of, in my personal opinion, I cannot see it as a form of torture.
And can you explain to the court why not?
I think, in my personal opinion, if you're sentenced, for instance, and you are detained as on your own in a prison, I would think that is even better than not being in solitary, being in a general lockup.
Mr. Else, have you heard of a practice referred to sometimes as the helicopter treatment, sometimes the aeroplane?
I've heard of that this morning, my lord.
So you know that it's about being suspended between two tables with a broomstick, which is tied between hands and knees.
I haven't seen that, my lord, and I'm not aware of it, my lord.
And have you heard of it, perhaps in discussion with colleagues?
No, my lord.
Mr. Els, if we can return to the question of the large number of interrogators who were brought in to deal with the influx of detainees. At that time, can you confirm that a number of interrogators and support staff were brought into John Vorster Square from out of town? Pretoria and elsewhere?
They may have been. I'm absolutely not certain who could have been brought in or if they were brought in, my lord. I personally cannot say that.
But in your experience working at John Vorster Square, when important detainees were apprehended, were outside interrogators and support staff brought in from time to time?
I'm not aware of that.
So as far as you're concerned, it was always in-house. You always used your own interrogators.
It could have been done by the personnel available, if sufficient. Yes, my lord.
Mr. Els, we've inspected the Department of Justice file in respect to the detainee, Kantilal Naik. My lord, that's Exhibit G3. In this particular file, and in fact there is a copy, if you wish to inspect it, you're free to do so. In fact, from page 3 onwards, there are documents that relate to a complaint that was lodged by Kantilal Naik, who was detained at that time, shortly after Mr. Timol was detained. And Mr. Naik made certain allegations that he had been abused. I'm not going to go through the particular allegations, but what is, or at least I will, but not right now. But what is interesting about that document, and the document in question is at page 5, and it's titled Kort Opsomming van Saak, John Vorster Plain, Rom 1406/11/71. So that's essentially the summing up of the complaint or allegations made by Mr. Naik. It's an interesting document because the names of the interrogators are listed. And in fact on page 10 at A16, you are listed as one of those interrogators. That's at the top of the page. But we conducted an exercise just to see how many interrogators were active or busy with Mr. Naik.
Which document are you referring to?
My lord, so that is the table that is marked C12. It's on the A4 sheet. Sorry, A3 sheet.
Mr. Els, are you having the correct document before you?
I've got the document, page 10, my lord.
Page
And
10.
Mr. Els, do you have an A3 sheet with you as well? It's a rather large, it's a
This one?
3-page sheet, yes.
Yeah.
If you can just look at it. Mr. Els, what we've done is that we've named the police officers on the left-hand side, surname, full name and rank, and then we've listed the actions associated with them, and most but not all are interrogators. So if one excludes officers, for example, who were involved in the arrest, we count some 17 individuals who were involved in the interrogation of Mr. Naik. So that's quite a large number of interrogators. And we've listed the times of interrogation from Saturday 23rd October all the way through to Wednesday 26th October. It appears that on Thursday 27 October Mr. Naik was taken to the cells. And then there was some further interrogation through to the 29th of October. So, just assuming that that calculation is correct and that there were approximately 17 interrogators questioning or interviewing Mr. Naik. Does that sound correct to you, that there could have been as many as 17 questioning one detainee?
If it is stated as such, it could have been.
Yes, but typically from your experience...
I wouldn't say typically, no.
Typically, what would the number be? Busy with one detainee?
2 officers. If it's a single interrogation, my lord, 2 officers would be available.
Yes.
In a particular session or throughout the period of detention, only 2 officers?
No, of a period of 1 day, my lord, 2 officers would be with him. If I look at this list, my lord, it's on a continuous basis.
Yes, in other words, the 2 officers interrogating would
Be for a period of...
for a particular period, and then they leave and others come in.
That could be, my lord.
So it appears, Mr. Els, this system was in place in order to keep going and to stop the detainee in question from sleeping.
I cannot comment on that, my lord. According to the facts I have here, I was involved in one interrogation session lasting, I think, 8 hours.
Yes, and in fact, if my calculation is correct, that's one straight session of 8 hours and 40 minutes that lasted from 10:20 p.m. on Saturday 23rd October
Till
to 7 a.m. on Sunday 24th October.
According to the statement here, yes, my lord.
And then it does seem that that he wasn't allowed to sleep, and in fact his interrogation continued.
That I wouldn't be aware of, my lord.
Right, but according to the documents we have provided, in fact his interrogation was pretty much continuous all the way through until Wednesday the 26th of October.
According to this, yes, my lord.
Yes. Mr. Else. There were 17 interrogators, if that figure is correct, busy with Mr. Nike over this period. Now, if we examine the original inquest records and the statements that were attached to the record of that inquest, we can only come up with 6 individuals who interviewed or interrogated Mr. Timol. So there's quite a disparity. In your view, is it quite likely that there were maybe other interrogators who were busy with?
I would have no knowledge of who they were, my lord. If they were.
Yes, you wouldn't have any knowledge of who they were. But in your view, is it likely or probable that there would have been more than 6 involved with Mr. Timol?
I cannot comment on that, my lord. I was definitely not aware of it.
Was it a tactic of the security branch to extract as much information out of detainees as quickly as possible following arrest, and at least say within a 24 to 72 hour period?
That would have been of value, yes.
And why was that important?
To do follow-up in case it was something serious where you would have gone to a scene and the evidence or whatever could have been removed. Your obtaining of the evidence within the quickest possible means was essential.
Yes. And was an additional reason to get information out, particularly information on co-conspirators or collaborators, and then to go after those collaborators before they could escape or hide, before they could get wind of the fact that their comrade was being held?
Correct, my lord.
So does that explain why the first few days of detention by the security branch tended to be have the most robust questioning or intensive questioning?
I would say it would have been intense, but in my personal opinion, not linked with torture, but intense interrogation, yes.
So are you saying that in those first few days there wasn't an attempt to break the detainee, to make him or her submissive through a form of assault or torture?
I would say the main object was to obtain information as soon as possible.
But not to break
no,
the
not to break the person, not to injure the person. Definitely not.
Mr. Else, we heard from a former security branch officer, Mr. Paul Erasmus. I think you actually might have heard his evidence.
I haven't heard his
haven't
evidence.
Heard his evidence. But he alleged that breaking detainees, assaulting them, applying torture to them by the security branch at John Vorster Square, at least during his time there, was standard practice. Would you dispute that?
I wouldn't agree with that, my lord.
And why wouldn't you agree with it?
That's my view, my opinion, and the way I would have interrogated, not with torture.
Right. So, in your view, is Mr. Erasmus mistaken about that statement?
I cannot confirm that.
All right. Returning to the interrogation of Mr. Nike, we've seen from Mr. Nike's member file that he was under continuous torture for some period, and that the shifts ranged from 2 hours, the short ones, to the longest I counted was 12 hours. I now want to refer you to assertions that Mr. Nike has made. And I have supplied you with his affidavit. And Lord, Mr. Nike's affidavit is contained in volume C at page 105. And at paragraph 14 of Mr. Nike's affidavit, he says he was taken to John Vorster Square in a police car. He was then taken to an office on the 10th floor. He was then made to wait for many hours before they began torturing him for information. Mr. Els, if you do want to look at his affidavit, it's a document titled Affidavit of Kantilal Nike.
I've got it.
You've got it. And then at paragraph 15, he says, before the police began with torturing me, they asked me to make a statement regarding his alleged involvement in activities with Ahmed, that's Ahmed Timol. Then in paragraph 16, he says he made a statement denying such involvement, but that this was rejected by the security policeman. And then at paragraph 18, he starts to describe torture that he sustained. The torture began when the police made me stand in the office for about 3 to 5 hours. I was not allowed to take a seat. I must have stood in the office until midnight. So that's his estimation of when he was standing, until midnight. And just so that we can refresh our memories, he was arrested on Saturday, the 23rd of October. That's in paragraph 9 of his affidavit. So it would seem, Mr. Els, that there appears to be some overlap between what is being alleged by Mr. Nike and your period of interrogation. And your period of interrogation began at 10:20 p.m. on the night of 23rd October through to 7 a.m. that morning. Did you ever, during the interrogation, require Mr. Nike to stand and not permit him to be seated?
I cannot recall that, my lord.
You cannot recall. But is it possible that this may have happened? Have you asked detainees to stand and not sit?
Yes, I have.
And why have you asked detainees to stand and not sit?
I don't know, my lord. I would have, to a certain degree, expected them to stand while I'm interrogating them. I cannot say for what periods of time, but it could have happened.
And could it be that you would require them to stand for an extended period, even hours at a time?
I would not have done that, my lord.
How long would you have required a detainee to stand? Or perhaps what would you regard as the maximum period?
I would say an hour and a half, 2 hours.
So at paragraph 19 of Mr. Nike's affidavit, he continues, dissatisfied with the responses I gave them, 2 burly policemen started assaulting me. I was like a seesaw. One punched me and I fell onto the other, and then so on, and that continued for several minutes. Did you witness such an event?
I did not, my lord.
And then in paragraph 20, he describes the helicopter treatment with the being hung from a broom. And you've already testified that
I'm
you
not aware
never
of that.
experienced
Not-
that or
no,
saw
my
that.
lord.
In paragraph 22, Mr. Naik complains that, well, he has several complaints, and one of them, of course, is not being allowed to sleep. Although for the record, it is reflected that he was taken to his cell the next morning, Sunday morning, where he was left for some time. But his particular complaint was that he lost all mobility in his hands. His hands and wrists were completely numbed.
Lord Mayor, I don't want to object unnecessarily, but this witness have indicated already what was his involvement with regard to Mr. Timol. And Lord, it is clear that the witness, as he has testified, doesn't have a recollection as to what happened with regard to Mr. Naik. Is there any purpose in continuing with this question? He already answered with regard to the forms of torture and what he knew about that and how he was perhaps involved in any, for example, the sleep deprivation. Is there any sense of dealing with this allegations by Professor Naik with this witness?
Well, if he has indicated that he has heard of, for example, the helicopter method and that he has never applied it,
Yes.
and the records indicate that at the time when Mr. Naik was suspended on the broomstick,
Yes.
he was one of the interrogators. Certainly that should be sent to him. That's the allegation that's been made. It's up to him to say yes or no.
But, my Lord, well, the allegation is not that he was present during that suspension, Lord. That is not how I understand my learned friend's cross-examination. Lord, that he was present during the helicopter treatment. I do not understand it like
Well,
that.
if you look at the, I don't know, the document C12,
Yes, my Lord.
it indicates the time on which he was involved in the interrogation
Yes, my Lord.
of Naik. That is 10:20 p.m., that's a Saturday,
Yes.
until Sunday morning 7.
Yes, my Lord.
Yes, and in this page 109, the allegations he's making is that he was subjected to that treatment during that period.
My Lord, that's not how I
So
understood.
that's the point I understand. I don't know when you say you don't understand. That's what counsel is trying to find out. Whether these things occurred during the period when he was involved in the interrogation, and whether he can recall these. I think I don't know.
But with great respect, my Lord, in that same file that my learned colleague is referred to, there were people identified by Mr. Naik as being the people that assaulted him and that tortured him, and this witness was not one of them. And I think we must just be fair in putting this allegations against this witness. It is people were clearly identified by Mr. Naik, and those names are specifically mentioned in this files that my learned colleague is referred to.
Were they identified in the files, you say?
Yes, indeed, so, my Lord. There were people that were identified that were investigated for these issues.
Can you show me where does this appear?
Lord, I will just have to, if your Lordship will just bear with me, I will just have to find it because that it is on my computer, my Lord. And but I think my learned colleague has it, my Lord.
Yes, my Lord, and in fact we were getting to that point before I was interrupted.
Okay, get to it quickly.
Okay. My Lord, before I do, I don't want to interrupt the line of questioning. Can I complete my earlier question?
Yes, are you taking the witness through each and every paragraph? He says he can't recall this.
Yes, but in fact, I do wish to take the witness through what he was alleged to have told those investigating the assault complaint.
Yes, get to that point.
Yes.
Because at the moment you are busy dealing with the affidavit of Professor Naik. get to the point of his involvement or non-involvement so that we should clear that up.
Yes. Mr. Els, I was taking you through Mr. Nike's affidavit where he said he was complaining that he had lost mobility in his hands, and that his hands and wrists were completely numb. Now, I wish to take you to the justice file of Mr. Nike, which you have before you. It's Exhibit G3. It should be marked in the right-hand corner. And if you could go to page 10. Firstly, do you recall being interviewed in relation to allegations or complaints that Mr. Nike had made of abuse against the police?
No.
Well, it does appear from this summing up of the complaints and perhaps I should just read it. It's at A16 at page 10 at the top. And the heading is A/O Neville Els Veiligheidspolisie John Vorster Plain sal verklaar. You shall declare dat hy en kaptein van Heerden die aangehoudende vanaf 10:20 namiddag op 23/10/1971 tot 7 voormiddag on the 24th of August 71 ondervra het. Aangehoudene altyd met sy hande in 'n gevoude posisie gestaan of gesit het. And then you say, hy geen kennis dra van, or rather it says, hy geen kennis dra van 'n aanranding op aangehoudene is, rather nie. Excuse my poor reading of that.
Which page are you on?
Page 10, Your Lord.
Well, but my document here is not numbered, you know.
My Lord, I thought we had provided you with a paginated copy.
Well, it's not paginated. It's
Can
not
we get a
paginated.
paginated copy, please? Is yours paginated? Just get it.
Yes.
This is. Yes. My Lord, apologies that your file is not paginated. Perhaps during the lunch break or at some other convenient time, my attorneys can inspect your file to ensure that everything is paginated.
Yes, I'd appreciate that. It's difficult to go through these documents which are not paginated, as we see. We are reading from page?
So page 10, it's paragraph A16. So, Mr. Els, I want to focus on the sentence where it says that during the period of interrogation, he had his hands in a folded position, either standing or sitting. And given the evidence of Mr. Nike, that he had sustained this helicopter treatment and as a result had lost all mobility in his hands. In fact, he says they had gone numb. Did it appear to you that he was holding his hands and in that position because he was in a distressed state and in pain?
I can't even recall that, my lord.
Just before you go there, this A16 statement, Adjutant Officer Neville Els, is that you? Was it?
That's me, my lord.
Do you recall ever having made this statement?
I can't recall it at this stage, my lord.
But would you dispute what is being said here? It says that you and Captain Van Heerden questioned the detainee from 10:20 p.m. on 23/10/1971 until 7 in the morning on the 24th, 10th. That's the period that's been described here. And it's attributed to you. Would you dispute that?
I cannot dispute it, my lord, but I cannot recall this.
You cannot recall?
I cannot, at no stage.
Yes, I think we are reaching the hour.
Yes, my lord, I see it is lunchtime.
Yes.
I will deal with the list of what is referred to as beskuldigers when we return from lunch.
Yes. Advocate Kuse, you see that statement there? It's in regard to the objection you had raised,
Yes.
that it comes from the Justice Department unless you contest the authenticity of it.
We
Yes.
do not contest that, my lord.
Yes.
It is not a statement, it is a summary of a statement, my lord, but we do
Yes.
not contest that. The witness himself says it's possible. Can't
So
recall it.
the interrogation during that period occurred, according to this document, in his presence. Now, the question is whether he recalls the evidence of Professor Naik or
Yes.
not, and he
Yes.
agrees with it or not. That's really the issue.
Yes, my lord. My lord, the issue, in fact, is that, my lord, in this inquiry that we are currently busy, and with great respect to the issues that are at hand, whether or not this witness was present at the interrogation of Professor Naik is not relevant to the issue at hand, my lord. I understand the need to elicit evidence regarding torture and with the way in which detainees were treated. That I can do understand, and I appreciate that. But whether or not this witness was involved with assault and torture of Professor Naik, with great respect, my lord, that is not the issue that is currently before you in terms of the inquest.
Yes, absolutely. I'm not going to inquire into
Yes.
whether he was involved in the assault of Mr.
Yes.
Naik. But the point raised by Advocate Vani is that since the witness had pointed out that he's not aware of any torture
Yes.
or any assaults that took place on 10th, I think he is entitled to raise this point, to draw it to his attention that there is an accusation or an allegation that puts him in a spot about allegations of torture.
Yes.
All he has to do is to say, yes, I participated, or no, I did not. That's all we need from him.
Yes, my lord, but in the same vein, it must just be fully put to the witness, because in terms of these documentation on which my learned colleague relies, the allegation of torture is not against this witness. It is against the identified persons that was identified as being the perpetrators of these assaults and torture. And I believe it's only fair that if one cross-examines this witness regarding his involvement, that one put it in the context that there was not an allegation made against him personally of assault or torture in relation to Professor Naik.
Well, you said that Professor Naik did not point him out. Is that what you are saying?
My lord, there is, in this file, there were people identified as being the perpetrators or the accused or suspects in relation to the assaults that took place. And that was the purpose of this summing up of the relevant witnesses at the security branch, was in relation to the allegations made against those specific people. And my lord, it is just to be fair against this witness, these allegations that was under investigation, when he made this statement, was a warrant officer Kluter, a Sergeant Ferreira, a Sergeant Pelser, and a Sergeant Carter.
Were they all participating during that period, that, from 10:20 to 7 o'clock in the evening?
No, my lord.
But the question is about those who were there at
Yes.
that time. And if he was one of them, certainly he can say, yes, I recall I was one of them, or no. The issue is not whether he did assault. The issue is whether he's aware that there were assaults that took place. Because the issue of assault, on the record, all the police persons have been denying that there was assault.
Yes.
That's why I took my time to explain to him about the finding by this court in relation to
Yes.
Colonel Grelem.
Yes.
So it's important that we clear this issue of assault. He seems to be holding the view that, to his knowledge, there were not assaults on the 10th floor.
But
And the other evidence that we have indicates otherwise. That's the whole point.
Yes.
But to argue it at this point, I think will defeat the process. You'll argue at the end,
I
you'll
will
get time.
I will indeed.
But I will allow the questions now because it's been disputed. If it was admitted, then we would not be getting into it.
I
We'll
appreciate
adjourn until 2 o'clock.
Thank you.
All rise.